This is Dallas, November 1963.
Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions, the Bible tells us. And where there is no vision, the people perish.
This is a very dangerous and uncertain world. We would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it.
The crowd goes wild as Jacqueline Kennedy, clutching blood-red roses against her pink suit.
President Kennedy flew to Texas, as you know, only yesterday in what was to be a two-day tour with major speeches.
And I said to the President, God bless you.
Well, we had not made the turn when I said, Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you. And we turned.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. There's numerous people running up the hill. Something has happened here. We understand there has been a shooting. The presidential car coming up now. We know it's the presidential car. You can see Mrs. Kennedy's pink suit. There's a Secret Service man, spread eagle over the top of the car.
The shot rang out and he slumped down in the seat, and his wife reached up toward him.
President Kennedy has been given a blood transfusion at Parkland Hospital here in Dallas in an effort to save his...
Just a moment, we have a bulletin coming in. We now switch you directly to Parkland Hospital.
The President of the United States is dead. President Kennedy has been assassinated. It's official now. The President is dead. As of just a few moments ago, the President of the United States is dead.
I'm John Chancellor. These images are seared in the memory of every American old enough to remember that day. Something graceful and important in our lives died that day. For millions of people, hope died. We knew the country, this great country, would go on, but we also knew it would never again be quite the same. This belief existed not only in the United States, but around the world and on both sides of the Iron Curtain. I was NBC's correspondent in Berlin then. Kennedy had been there a few months before his death, and he was idolized by Berliners. The people of that city are tough. They have lived through more tragedy and dislocation than most, but they were devastated by Kennedy's death. In West Berlin, you would get in a taxi, give your destination, and the driver would say, "American?" When you said yes, the meter would be turned off and you rode free. They wouldn't take your money. I took one of those taxis that night to Checkpoint Charlie to look into communist East Berlin. In every window of every building facing the wall, there was a candle of mourning. John F. Kennedy meant something to those Berliners, too. In Washington on the day of the assassination, people stood around the White House in small groups, stunned, some weeping. Mary McGrory, the newspaper columnist, was standing with Daniel Patrick Moynihan, now the senator, then an administration official. She said, "Pat, we'll never laugh again." And Moynihan said, "No, Mary, we'll laugh again, but we'll never be young again." Here now, the NBC coverage of the death of a president.
A new Mrs. Kennedy has emerged this trip, a first lady no longer shy about the rough and tumble of politics. On arrival in Dallas from Fort Worth, she was true to her new form. She plunged ahead of the president into the ecstatic crowds. Some of them caught her glove, mauled her sleeve, even grabbed one of the roses off its stem. There were no hostile signs at the airport crowd, only eagerness for contact with the Kennedys. Then into the open limousine for the motorcade through Dallas. The president had done this thousands of times. He sat on the right, Mrs. Kennedy on the left. Everywhere the crowds were bigger than expected. Dallas authorities were jittery. Security precautions were the heaviest in the city's history. Dallas was determined that its name, smirched round the world by the attack on UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson last month, would not be dragged through the mud again. There were heavy police forces all along the route. All possible troublemakers had been searched out and warned. All but one. The downtown streets. In the first press bus, we strained to catch any signs of the hostility the Dallas precautions had led us to expect. But all we saw was a vast and friendly crowd, but many thousands of welcome jack signs. It's approaching 12:30 p.m. Dallas time. The crowds in the tall business district are overfilling the sidewalks. Some throw streamers and torn paper in a miniature ticker tape parade. The reporters look at each other. There have been no incidents. At about 12:32, the motorcade turns a corner into a parkway. The crowds are thinner. NBC cameraman Dave Wigman, in a car ahead of us, takes a passing shot of a building, then 3 shots are heard, like toy explosions. Wigman jumps from his car, running towards the president with his camera running. People scream and lie down, grabbing their children. I leave the motorcade and run after police who appear to be chasing somebody. The motorcade moves off fast. We don't know it, but the president is mortally wounded in the head and throat. His car races for the hospital. The police find no one and return. Looking for a phone, I go into an office. It's on the ground floor of this building, the Texas School Book Depository. It is not more than 4 minutes after the shooting. Minutes after a man on the 5th floor of the same building has abandoned a high-powered rifle and fled. Waves of police move in. A small Negro boy tells them he saw a man with a rifle in a window upstairs. Witnesses come up. They saw the president hit.
He was coming down the street, and my 5-year-old boy and myself were by ourselves on the grass there on Commerce Street, and I asked Joe to wave to him, and Joe waved, and I waved, and the man... That's all right, sir. You go ahead and tell it. As he was waving back, the shot rang out, and he slumped down in the seat, and his wife reached up toward him, and as he was slumping down, and the second shot went off, and it just knocked him down from the seat. 2 shots? 2 shots.
Did you see the man who did this?
No, sir, I did not see the man who did it. All I did was look in the man's face when he was shot there and saw that expression on his face and grab himself and slide. And the second one, whenever it went, why, I'm positive it had hit him. I hope it didn't, but I'm positive that it hit him, and he went all the way down in the car. Then they speeded up, and I didn't know what was going on, so I just grabbed the boy and fell on him in the hopes that there wasn't a maniac around. I'm sorry. I can't help you more, but I won't forget it.
The motorcade reaches Parkland Memorial Hospital. It goes immediately to the emergency entrance. Bleeding profusely and unconscious, the president is lifted onto a stretcher and carried to emergency operating room number 1. Doctors say his condition is grave and moribund, that is, near death on arrival. A senior house physician is in attendance. A professor of neurosurgery and other doctors come immediately. Mrs. Kennedy, untouched by the bullets, is with her husband. Texas Governor John Connally, also seriously wounded, is also in an emergency ward. The doctors try every possible way to save the president. Oxygen is given and anesthetics, a blood transfusion, a tracheotomy, that is, making an opening in the throat to aid breathing. The president's heart stops. External massage was applied to his chest, but no pulse results. A priest is called to administer the last rites of the Roman Catholic Church. At approximately 1 o'clock, the president is dead. The doctors were working too frantically to revive him to notice the exact moment. The press and public do not know the president is dead for another half hour. The only reports available are that he is gravely wounded. At 1:31 Central Time, White House Assistant Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff tells the press the president is dead.
The President of the United States is dead. President Kennedy has been assassinated. It's official.
At that moment, Vice President Lyndon Johnson, suddenly the new president, leaves the hospital. A new Secret Service detail just arrived, forms up around him, and he leaves for the airport. There, in the president's jet plane, Air Force One, a hastily summoned woman federal judge with a borrowed Bible administers the oath of office. The president's body, in a bronze coffin, is flown to Washington.
The last journey of John Fitzgerald Kennedy was characteristically a political one, and characteristically also his trip dealt with the future. The president's last 2 days began at Andrews Air Force Base outside of Washington, where a helicopter had flown him from the White House. He was accompanied on this trip by his wife, Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, who was making her first public appearance since the birth and tragic death of their third child, Patrick. The president's trip would concern itself with the problems of outer space during the next decade, and also with some down-to-earth problems having to do with next year's presidential campaign. Mr. Kennedy's forthright civil rights stand had lost him many votes throughout the South, but the 24 Texas votes in the Electoral College figured prominently in his strategy for re-election. The president, therefore, was determined to heal a split in the Texas Democratic Party, which had widened since the election of Governor John Connally last year. This is the president boarding the plane, leaving Washington. The president had another purpose for making this particular trip. It was to emphasize anew his determination to support the nation's Man on the Moon program. To that end, the late president's first touchdown was at San Antonio's International Airport, his mission to dedicate the new Aerospace Medical Health Center at nearby Brooks Air Force Base. Both at the airport and in the motorcade later, the crowds were large and the welcome was friendly. Mr. Kennedy rode in an open car with Texas Governor Connally, a political ally of Mr. Lyndon Johnson. The new president, Mr. Johnson, is regarded as having played an important part in winning Texas to the Democratic column in the last election. And Mr. Johnson has also displayed a long and devoted interest in all matters regarding space. It was important, therefore, that Mr. Johnson accompanied the president, although in San Antonio, as in Dallas today, he rode in a different car as a precaution. Although the president's space program has recently encountered some congressional criticism as being too costly, space is an important industry in Texas and is a popular Democratic program. With Mrs. Kennedy on the platform, the late president helped dedicate the new $6 million Aerospace Health Center.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, Governor, Mr. Vice President, Senator, members of the Congress, members of the military, ladies and gentlemen. For more than 3 years, I've spoken about the new frontier. This is not a partisan term, and it's not the exclusive property of Republicans or Democrats. It refers instead to this nation's place in history, to the fact that we do stand on the edge of a great new era, filled with both crisis and opportunity, an era to be characterized by achievement and by challenge. It is an era which calls for action, and for the best efforts of all those who would test the unknown and the uncertain in every phase of human endeavor. It is a time for pathfinders and pioneers. I have come to Texas today to salute an outstanding group of pioneers, the men who manned the Brooks Air Force Base School of Aerospace Medicine and the Aerospace Medical Center.
His plane continued on schedule to Houston, where his most important speech of the 2-day trip was to take place. John Kennedy arrived and was greeted by large crowds of enthusiastic supporters. The irony of the events of the last few days before the assassination of the president is nowhere more poignant, perhaps, than in these scenes of his happy supporters cheering him on just a few hours before he was shot. It was, in fact, with just this end in mind, to gain enthusiastic support for next year's election campaign, that Mr. Kennedy undertook his trip that proved fatal. It also sought to heal a split in the Texas Democratic Party by gaining a compromise between the warring factions in order to achieve a unified effort to carry Texas for the Democrats in 1964. But his political maneuvers have been rendered futile, struck down by the fusillade which has taken the life of Mr. Kennedy and critically wounded the governor. Mr. Johnson is now president, and the consequences for 1964 of today's tragedy are still too obscure to comprehend, if even to be contemplated. But last night in Houston, John Kennedy's thoughts were taken up with his political future and this nation's future. Mr. Kennedy spoke about the place that Texas and the United States will take in the space effort of the next decade. He referred specifically to the firing of the giant Saturn booster that is scheduled to take place next month, and he also referred to the Race to the Moon, a project which has occupied an important place in his presidential program. The speech was delivered at a testimonial dinner for Representative Albert Thomas, one of the most influential members of Congress. Thomas is considered to have been instrumental in gaining for Houston and the area the substantial United States investment in the Manned Spacecraft Center. It fell to Lyndon Johnson to praise Congressman Thomas, and in doing so, the new president recalled an anecdote which might well have been applied to himself. Here we see the dignitaries gathering, President Kennedy shaking hands. We just saw Mrs. Kennedy a few moments ago. Flashbulbs, always. This in Houston, and we are to hear first, I believe, the Vice President.
Congressman Thomas, Mrs. Thomas, Mr. President, Ms. Kennedy, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Some years ago, someone asked Speaker Rayburn why it happened that the Texas delegation in Congress had such an uncommon influence upon the course of national affairs. Mr. Rayburn's reply was characteristically pointed and quite brief. He said, "We pick 'em honest, we pick 'em young, we send 'em there and we keep 'em there."
Then President Kennedy spoke, referred to Thomas as one of the most remarkable members of Congress. In what was to be his last major address, the president said,
"Next month, when the United States of America fires the largest booster in the history of the world into space for the first time, giving us the lead, fires the largest payload into space, giving us the lead. It will be the largest payroll, too. Who should know that better than Houston? In 1990, your sons, daughters, grandsons, and grandchildren will be applying to the colleges of this state in a number 3 times what they do today. Our airports will serve 5 times as many passenger miles. We will need housing for 100 million more people, and many times more doctors and engineers and technicians than we are presently producing. That is why we're trying to do more in these areas. As in the 30s, Albert Thomas and Franklin Roosevelt and others did those things which make it possible for not only Texas, but the entire United States to prosper and grow as we do in the 1960s. In 1990, the age of space will be entering its second phase, and our hopes in it to preserve the peace, to make sure that in this great new sea, as on Earth, the United States is second to none.
The president was a family man, and his wife was among his most valuable political assets. The Kennedys were married while he was still a senator, but Mrs. Kennedy never really got accustomed to traveling the political circuit. It was therefore a little unusual that she went with him on this 2-day swing through Texas. This morning, when they arrived in Dallas, the people there got a glimpse of the president as a family man. Here is a report from Robert McNeil at station WBAP, Fort Worth.
The president began the day by playing with much enjoyment the role of the husband of Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy. The first act of the day was a short walk in the rain to a crowd across from the hotel, a spirited speech, and a reference to his wife that delighted the people and set a gay tone for the whole morning.
I appreciate your being here this morning. Mr. Kennedy is organizing yourself. It takes longer. That's because she looks better than we do.
The president was in his best form, looking refreshed after a good night's sleep, reveling in the crisp morning, and invigorated by his reception. There was more cheering and handshaking inside the hotel, where the president attended a Chamber of Commerce breakfast. But as all the people on the platform were introduced, there were more and more whispers of, "Where is Jackie?" Mrs. Kennedy, in fact, was waiting outside the room for a cue to enter. It was she many came to see, and finally they did. Resplendent in a pink suit and pillbox hat, Mrs. Kennedy made an entrance in keeping with the new image she'd revealed during the Texas trip. It had been her first participation in a domestic political trip since the 1960 campaign. It obviously delighted the president to have her blossom into an appreciation of the political life she shrank from previously. At each stop, Mrs. Kennedy had been as forward as the president in shaking hands. Some had called her the president's secret weapon for 1964. Watching her entrance this morning, a White House official described it as tactical. It looked as though there would be a lot of scenes like this in the future. The feuding in the Texas Democratic Party, which had preoccupied the statewide press for the visit, was not able to distract the rank and file from the glamour of having the president and his wife to visit.
Ladies and gentlemen, I proudly present the President of the United States.
It was the kind of occasion John Kennedy had delighted in before, and his mind went back to a day as sunny and brilliant as this one in Texas, a day in Paris 2.5 years ago, when the freshness of this American couple took the French by storm.
I know now why everyone in Texas, Fort Worth, is so thin, having gotten up and down about 9 times. This is what you do every morning. Mr. Buck, Mr. Vice President, Governor Conley, Senator Yarborough, Jim Wright, members of the congressional delegation, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Attorney General, ladies and gentlemen. 2 years ago, I said that, introduced myself in Paris by saying that I was the man who had accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris. I'm getting somewhat that same sensation as I travel around Texas.
Meanwhile, Dallas police had captured 24-year-old Lee Oswald, an acknowledged left-wing supporter of Fidel Castro. He was first charged with killing a Dallas policeman while resisting arrest. He was later charged with the murder of the president. The president's plane bearing his body arrived at Andrews Field near Washington late yesterday afternoon. Mrs. Kennedy accompanied the casket to Bethesda Naval Hospital. And here now is President Lyndon B. Johnson delivering the first formal words to the American public.
This is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God's.
About all that could happen on one day has. For some final reflection on one of the more horrible days in American history, you find there is a great deal that could be said about the political and other changes we can look forward to now, but I think it would be bad taste to go into that now, and I won't. It has all been shocking, but perhaps one element in the shock was the speed. By the Washington clock, at a little after 1 o'clock this afternoon, President Kennedy was about as alive as any human being ever gets. Young, strong, vigorous, looking forward to, no doubt, 5 more years, he hoped, of leadership in this country and of the Western world. His wife, young, beautiful, looking very happy, was beside him and seeming to be having a wonderful time and leaning across the back seat of the car to say to him, "You can't say Dallas hasn't been friendly to you." And that was a little after 1 o'clock. 5 hours later, at 6 o'clock, Mr. Kennedy had been murdered. Lyndon Johnson was President of the United States. Mrs. Kennedy was a widow, a brave and composed one that nobody could fail to admire. All of them were back in Washington, returning in the same airplane that took them to Texas to an incredible tragedy. And the sheer speed of it was just too fast for the senses. Roosevelt, dead of a stroke, came back here from Warm Springs, Georgia, in a train, the sides of it draped in black crepe. It steamed majestically across the southern landscape toward Washington, taking a little time about it and giving everybody a time to think a bit about what had happened. But not today. There is seldom any time to think anymore, and today there was none. In about 4 hours, we had gone from President Kennedy in Dallas alive to back in Washington dead, and a new president in his place. There is no more news here tonight, and really no more to say, except that what has happened today has been just too much, too ugly, and too fast. Frank?
There is no way of calculating the millions of words that have been uttered in the course of this day in all countries of the world as human beings fumble for words to express their offended senses at what has happened in the United States. I seriously doubt that any words uttered by anyone anywhere have succeeded in expressing what you feel yourself. I would suppose that the answer for that is only to be found in the hearts of each of us.
The president's body was brought last night from Bethesda Naval Hospital, seen here in Bethesda, Maryland. Brought from there to the White House in a Navy ambulance, Mrs. Kennedy along with it. The White House from here is about 12 miles. People were still standing in Lafayette Park. They stood there all night, about 1,000 of them, as a Marine honor guard marched up the driveway of the White House, leading the ambulance to the north portico, that is the front center door behind those big white columns. 4 a.m., as we say. Mrs. Kennedy had not left her husband since early morning yesterday in Dallas, Texas, through the shooting, the trip back here, the Navy hospital, and now finally back to the White House for the last time. Here is the inside of the East Room of the White House after the casket has been brought in, set up, and draped with an American flag. It is still there, as seen here, under constant guard, honor guard, by men from the Army, the Navy, the Marines, and the Air Force. These are among the first of the dignitaries, shall I say, who have been arriving all day and passing through the East Room. A brief gesture of respect. That's the Chief of Protocol of the U.S. government, Angier Biddle-Duke, greeting the Chief Justice of the United States, Earl Warren. Senator Saltonstall of Massachusetts. Secretary of the Air Force, Eugene Zuckert. General Curtis LeMay of the Air Force. Chief Justice Warren and Mrs. Warren. Harry Truman arriving. Sergeant Shriver, the president's brother-in-law, accompanies him in. He was out front receiving the callers most of the day. Joe Martin, former Speaker of the House when the Republicans had the majority leader before Halleck was, Governor Rockefeller and Mrs. Rockefeller. Here is some of what will happen tomorrow. Mr. Kennedy's body will be taken on a caisson or a field artillery gun carriage from the White House up Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol. It'll be draped in the American flag. It'll be drawn by 7 horses brought by the U.S. Army from Arlington, Virginia, where they are used for ceremonial funerals in Arlington Cemetery. The caisson will proceed up the avenue accompanied by a military honor guard from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, followed by a corps from the Army, Navy, and Marines playing muffled drums, a marching company from the Navy, which was the President's own service in the war, a flag detail, plus a single serviceman carrying the presidential flag, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff marching as an honor guard. The President's family, President Johnson, and Mr. Kennedy's family, President Johnson, and clergymen of all faiths then will pass in automobiles. The coffin will be carried up the marble steps of the Capitol into the rotunda, where it'll lie in state on a black catafalque, I believe the same one, but if not, one just like the one built for Abraham Lincoln and preserved in the sub-basement of the Capitol ever since. It will lie there until 10 o'clock Monday morning, when it'll be carried again on the caisson in procession, the same procession, to St. Matthew's Cathedral in downtown Washington for the funeral at noon. The place of burial after that has not been announced at this hour, but we believe it will be in Arlington Cemetery. Chet?
It's a logical assumption that hatred, far left, far right, political, religious, economic, or paranoid, moved the person or persons who today committed this combined act of murder and national sabotage. There is in this country, and there has been for too long, an ominous and sickening popularity of hatred. The body of the president lying at this moment in Washington is the thundering testimonial of what hatred comes to and the revolting excesses it perpetrates. Hatred is self-generating, contagious. It feeds upon itself and explodes into violence. It is no inexplicable phenomenon that there are pockets of hatred in our country, areas and communities where the disease is permitted or encouraged or given status by those who can and do influence others. You and I have heard in recent months someone say, those Kennedys ought to be shot. A well-known national magazine recently carried an article saying Chief Justice Warren should be hanged. In its own defense, it said it was only joking, but the left has been equally bad. Tonight, it might be the hope and the resolve of all of us that we've heard the last of this kind of talk, jocular or serious, for the result is tragically the same.
Former President Eisenhower has been among the world notables to give his reaction to the tragic loss of the American president. We'd like to bring you his statement at this time.
I share the sense of shock and dismay that the entire nation must feel at the despicable act that took the life of the nation's president.
President Kennedy yesterday wrote the final and greatest chapter in his profiles of courage. Today, millions of people throughout the world are trying to find words adequate to express their grief and their sympathy to his family.
Mrs. Rockefeller and I join with all New Yorkers and every American in extending heartfelt sympathy to Mrs. Kennedy and the President's family.
I think this is something that should cause all of us to re-examine many things, and I think above all that we should see that President Kennedy was a victim of a development which has made hatred and violence a sort of popular pastime in all too many quarters of our nation.
The tragedy of this day is beyond instant comprehension. All of us who knew him will bear the grief of his death to the day of ours. and all men everywhere who love peace and justice and freedom will bow their heads. At such a moment, we can only turn to prayer. Prayer to comfort our grief, to sustain Mrs. Kennedy and his family, to strengthen President Johnson, and to guide us in time to come. May God help us.
Mayor Willy Brandt of West Berlin asked the people of the city to put candles in their windows tomorrow night in memory of the American president who had so eloquently, and only a few months ago, pledged his affection and allegiance to this city. Mayor Brandt, who is expected to go to the United States for the funeral, said tonight that with the first citizen of the free world, Berlin has lost its best friend. Students from Berlin's Free University tonight will stage a midnight memorial march through the center of West Berlin. They will march on some of the streets traveled by the president when he visited this encircled city in June. The student march will end at the Schöneberg Rathaus, the city hall where Mr. Kennedy made his famous "I am a Berliner" speech. Tonight, on a cold and rainy night, other West Berliners mourn him.
Meanwhile, here in Washington, the high drama of the day had begun. A wheeled caisson, drawn by 6 matched grays, arrived at the north portico of the White House shortly before 1 p.m. There was a 7th horse, a black riderless stallion with reversed boots in the stirrups, symbolic of the dead commander-in-chief. A few minutes after 1 o'clock, with Washington bathed in the light of a cold winter sun, uniformed pallbearers from all of the armed services walked slowly from the White House with the casket containing the body of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The military honor guard snapped to present arms. Then came Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, pale but composed, holding the hands of daughter Caroline and son John Jr. As the casket was placed atop the caisson, Mrs. Kennedy stared fixedly ahead. She stopped to quiet Caroline and young John, who seemed thankfully unaware of what was happening. To the mournful rattle of muffled drums, the cortege began its slow march out of the White House grounds onto Pennsylvania Avenue and thence to the Capitol, a mile distant. The cadence was a steady 100 steps to the minute. Ahead of the caisson marched the drummers, 3 clergymen, a color guard, and a detachment of sailors. And flanking the flag-draped casket was an honor guard from all the armed services: Marines, soldiers, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, and sailors. And always the sound of drums. Along Constitution Avenue to the Capitol Plaza, the cortege made its way through silent crowds 10 and 12 deep. Police estimated the throng at more than 300,000, many of whom had stood waiting for hours before dawn. At the Capitol, as the Navy band played the Navy hymn, the casket was lifted from the caisson, carried into the rotunda, and placed on the Lincoln catafalque. Mrs. Kennedy, her face drawn and tired, but miraculously still composed, followed close behind and took her place among the mourners. She stood stiff and erect as the eulogies echoed through the chamber.
President and Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Kennedy, members of the Kennedy family, my fellow Americans, all. There was the sound of laughter, and in a moment, it was no more. And so, she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands. There was a wit in a man, neither young nor old, but a wit full of an old man's wisdom and a child's wisdom. And then, in a moment, it was no more. And so she took a ring from her finger
and placed it in his hands. There was a man marked with the scars of his love of country, a body active with the surge of a life far from spent, and in a moment it was no more. And so she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands. There was a father with a little boy and a little girl, and the joy of each in the other, and in a moment it was no more. And so she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands. There was a husband who asked much and gave much, and out of the giving and the asking wove with a woman what could not be broken in life, and in a moment it was no more. And so she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands and kissed him and closed the lid of the coffin. A piece of each of us died at that moment. Yet in death, he gave of himself to us. He gave us of a good heart from which the laughter came. He gave us of a profound wit from which a great leadership emerged. He gave us of a kindness and a strength fused into the human courage to seek peace without fear. He gave us of his love that we, too, in turn, might give. He gave that we might give of ourselves, that we might give to one another until there would be no room at all for the bigotry, the hatred, the prejudice, and the arrogance which converged in that moment of horror to strike him down. In leaving us these gifts, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President of the United States, leaves with us. Will we take them, Mr. President? Will we have now the sense and the responsibility and the courage to take them? I pray to God that we shall, and under God we will.
Then the collective heart of the nation missed 1, 2, 3 beats as Mrs. Kennedy and Caroline walked slowly to the bier. They knelt, the two heads bowed as one. And then Mrs. Kennedy leaned forward and kissed the flag on her husband's casket. Mother and daughter rose and walked slowly then with immense dignity back to their places.
Even as this solemn ceremony was underway in Washington, a story of incredible dimensions was reaching a climax in Dallas, Texas. Lee Harvey Oswald, the 24-year-old man accused of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, was being transferred from city jail to county jail. As he was being brought down a ramp leading to the garage sub-basement of the city jail, he was shot by a man in the crowd at close range. The man is grabbed by Dallas police.
Detectives have their guns drawn. Oswald has been shot. There is no question about it. Oswald has been shot. Pandemonium has broken loose here in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters.
A scene of wild pandemonium in the sub-basement of the Dallas City Hall. Now, there is also an utterly incredible picture made by an Associated Press photographer, which we would like you to see now. And you will see the gun actually being held next to the abdomen of Oswald. See the gun in the circle, the man in the light gray hat. Oswald flanked by two detectives. This was at 12:17 Eastern Standard Time. 15 minutes later, 12:32, he arrived at Parkland Hospital where President Kennedy had died on Friday. He was taken to an emergency room that was only 10 or 12 feet from where the late president had been treated. He was immediately transferred from there to surgery. All efforts were made to save his life. At one point, his heart stopped beating. His chest was opened and his heart was massaged by hand. This seemed to revive the beat momentarily, but it ultimately failed, and he died at 7 minutes past 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 48 hours and 7 minutes after the death of President Kennedy. Now, the man who fired the shot has been identified as Jack Ruby, the operator of a Dallas nightclub. 2 nightclubs, in fact. They are called, in the vernacular, striptease joints. He is a known police character.
7 hours later, by then it was night here in Washington, and the temperature was inching down toward the freezing mark when Mrs. Kennedy returned to the rotunda, knelt at the bier, and again kissed the flag on the casket. But in the darkness, the people moved. By the thousands, they formed a patient, silent column, 4 abreast and up to 9 miles long, as they waited to say farewell to their late president. 50 a minute, they climbed the steps of the east portico of the Capitol and shuffled into the rotunda, flowing around the bier and its guard of honor in twin, unending streams. By midnight, it was said that 100,000 persons had passed through the rotunda. By 9 o'clock this morning, when the public viewing is to cease, the total is expected to pass 250,000. Many were young people, some children carried by their parents. There were teenagers, college students, young men and women. To the young, especially to the young, the loss of John Fitzgerald Kennedy was a blow they seemed unwilling to concede. Some spoke of waiting 9, 10 hours in the biting cold. No one complained. There were tears, murmured prayers, compassionate smiles, and quick, fretful glances. There was respect, awe, humility, and an almost visible bond of love that reached out from these silent lines to the quiet casket. In death, as in life, John F. Kennedy was where he most wanted to be, among the people of the United States. We will bury a president this morning. Preparations are being made for that now.
All day and all night they came, thousands upon thousands of them, and still they come. The old, the young, the children, the teenager, even the infirm, shuffling slowly by to pay tribute to their president. Sometimes with a glance, a prayer, a tear, and sometimes an imperceptible shake of the head. The line does not diminish, it grows, as if the whole world mourns this man, and it does. Throughout the morning we will be here to report to you from the rotunda. Now here is Frank Blair at St. Matthew's.
This is St. Matthew's Cathedral in our nation's capital. In just a few hours, the funeral rites for the late John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 35th President of the United States, will be held in this building. The slain president's Boston pastor, Richard Cardinal Cushing,
who gave a prayer at his inauguration, you may remember, will offer the Mass before an invited congregation of 1,200 persons. The church seats only 1,200 persons. And these 1,200 will include members of the Kennedy family, the cabinet, other presidential appointees, members of Congress, the federal judiciary, heads of state, diplomats, and close friends. This is Frank Blair at St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington.
In a little less than 3 hours from now, Mrs. John F. Kennedy will leave the White House with her brother-in-law, the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, and they'll drive to the Capitol, where Mrs. Kennedy was twice yesterday, once to accompany the body of her husband, the late President John F. Kennedy, and then again in the evening, where she went to pay another call at the coffin of her husband, which now lies in the rotunda, which has been seen by thousands of persons who file past all through the night.
As each American kept his own vigil this long weekend, one group of young men kept a very special vigil. These are the honor guards who have been guarding the casket of President Kennedy since he arrived at the East Wing of the White House. The men will continue to serve on the honor guard until the casket of President Kennedy leaves the rotunda.
During the early hours of the morning, the number of people coming through at any given time was increased, about doubled. It was permitted all but about 10,000 of those who wanted to come by the casket to do so.
We're back at the White House. We're awaiting the appearance of Mrs. Kennedy and other members of the family. There she is now. This is the plaza in front of the Capitol, normally a parking lot.
The stamina of this woman through these past 3 and 4 days has been indescribable. It certainly has touched the entire nation. The hymn which was played as the casket was borne down the steps of the Capitol was, "O God of Loveliness." Now the cortege starts back down the hill to the White House and then on to the church. It was 2 years, 10 months, 5 days ago. We were here in Washington to broadcast a day of triumph in the life of John F. Kennedy's inauguration. A tremendous snowstorm had settled upon the city the night before. Inauguration day dawned brittle cold and blazing white. The mantle which the city wore on that day was somehow fitting. The government of the nation was new. The oldest president in the history of the nation was handing over the mantle to the youngest president. A new generation was taking over, not figuratively, but actually. And that day, the young president, we heard some say that he was Apollo-like, rode down this hill from this Capitol and down this avenue of presidents. His pretty wife beside him, and he waved and smiled at the cheers, and the units marched and the bands played.
That is the music of a Navy band passing 6th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. Playing Onward, Christian Soldiers. cortege itself. 6 white horses, the 7th leading them. The president's flag borne proudly behind and sadly behind by Seaman, a young man named Nemeth. On, of course, and the seaman carrying the presidential flag, the riderless horse, Black Jack.
Single flag behind the casement is the personal flag of the President of the United States, made of blue silk, fringed in gold, and embroidered on its face is the American eagle, holding an olive branch in one hand and the arrows of war, one claw, and the arrows of war in another. During, I think, the Truman administration, he ordered the eagle's head turned so it would be looking toward the olive branch rather than at the arrow. And that's the way it is today.
The late president's father, 75-year-old Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., was taken on a drive of southern Cape Cod this morning so he might see the flags at half-mast in the resort area, which he and his family have known and loved for so many years.
inside the grounds of the White House. Approaching the north portico, the front door, for the last time. Procession to the cathedral is Mrs. Kennedy and the Attorney General, followed by President Lyndon Johnson, then the chiefs of state and of government and foreign delegates to the funeral. There is no American precedent for a first lady walking in a funeral procession, though it has been done in other countries and other eras. It is done here partly because the distance to the cathedral is short, a few blocks, perhaps a half mile. This presumably would be the pipes of the Irish detail. Emperor Haile Selassie, Ethiopia. Again, President de Gaulle. King Baudouin. Prince Philip, Great Britain. There are here for these ceremonies today at least 22 presidents or prime ministers, 3 reigning monarchs, and princes or princesses of 9 countries. That is St. Matthew's Cathedral, the diocesan center for Washington. Mr. Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy have worshipped here often in the past. It's the closest Catholic church to the White House, I believe. Admission to the funeral service is by ticket only because there are only a little more than 1,100 seats inside. Barely not enough for all of the visitors, native and foreign, family, friends, and others who would like to come. So the only graceful way it could be done was to issue invitations and to send out cards to those who were invited. Black and gold hanging over the entrance to the church. The same colors displayed on the death of popes. The cathedral is something of a landmark in Washington, even though it is now physically somewhat overshadowed by tall buildings. Carolyn Kennedy and John Kennedy. Today is John F. Kennedy Jr.'s 3rd birthday.
Cardinal Cushing.
Richard Cardinal Cushing of Boston.
And Archbishop Patrick O'Boyle.
Cardinal Cushing married the Kennedys. Cardinal Cushing will celebrate, and I believe that is the correct word, the funeral mass. He is an old Kennedy family friend. The mass was set for noon, and it is precisely noon now. It is to be a low mass rather than a high one at the request of Mr. Kennedy's family. The Cardinal agreed. During the Mass, Father Leonard Hurley will be here to tell us what is happening and, where necessary, what it means.
This is my body. Now blessing the chalice, he recites the words of Christ himself as he consecrates the wine. For this is the chalice of my blood of the new and eternal covenant, the mystery of faith which shall be shed for you and for many unto the forgiveness of sins.
In me memoriam faciet. Honed members Dominos habitus et plebs tuus adius de Christi fidi tui Dominos de tam beati passionis nec non ed ab imbus resurrectionis sed et in cel curios ascensionis apparens megae maestae tui de tuus unus actae. Ostium vorum, ostium signum, ostium macalan upon
The prayers after the consecration call to mind the passion, resurrection, and ascension of our Lord. Now the Cardinal prays for the faithful departed, that they may have comfort and peace, naming in particular in this Mass our late beloved President, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. May the angels take you into paradise. May the martyrs come to welcome you on your way and lead you into the holy city of Jerusalem. The Mass is the summit of Christian life, the source of its power, for in it, Christ gathers up his brothers and presents them to the Father as one with him, thus offering all honor and glory forever and ever. This Mass has been offered for John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. May he rest in peace.
minds of John F. Kennedy are about to pass a memorial to another president assassinated. Inside it is a little inscription which is nearly perfect in its eloquence and simplicity. It says, "In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever." Now the caisson is entering onto Memorial Bridge, flanked at this end by two gold-plated statues of horses given to the American people by the people of Italy after World War II.
The caissons, drawn by the 7 horses whose hooves are audible in the background, making their way up now one of the curved driveways. The military detail preceding the cortege.
Beside Mr. Kennedy's grave here in Arlington will be an eternal flame, which has never previously been seen in Arlington. It was arranged at the request of Mrs. Kennedy, I believe.
hushed sounds. Edward Kennedy. The national anthem, and in a moment the U.S. Air Force bagpipes. Slowly marching across the lawn near the site, the slow, somber bagpipes playing "The Mist Over the Mountain." And the casket is being moved off the caisson as Mrs. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy watch from a nearby limousine. Being escorted by a military officer, followed by other clergymen, preceding the coffin. Soldiers in the berets, members of the Special Forces groups, those highly trained men designed particularly to handle the so-called limited wars. It was just a couple of weeks ago, on Armistice Day, that the President was here to pay tribute to the unknown soldiers and all the dead of the wars, the tombs of the unknown soldiers, not too distant from this spot. Two weeks ago today. And the Irish Guard in a salute. And while this scene goes on as the airplanes, 30 Air Force fighters, 20 Navy fighter aircraft. One, the presidential aircraft. Again, the Irish Guard. French President de Gaulle being ushered to a position near the grave. Next to him, the Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. To his right, separated only by a military officer, President Heinrich Lübke of the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany. Behind Emperor Haile Selassie, Chancellor Ludwig Erhard, who has just held his job for about 2 weeks.
Lord, hear my prayer and let my cry come unto thee.
Soon the 21-gun salute. De Gaulle, Emperor Haile Selassie.
in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. The Lord be with you and with your spirit. Let us pray. O God, by whose word all things are made holy, pour down thy blessing on this light which thou hast created, and grant that whoever giving thanks to thee uses it in accordance with thy law and thy will, may by calling upon thy holy name receive to thy aid, health the body, and protection of soul, and grace to follow in the way of the wonderful man whom we bury here today. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
And so, on this crisp but sunny November afternoon, John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, is laid to rest on a gentle slope overlooking the city of Washington.
As a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed and to which we are committed today at home and around the world. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This much we pledge and more.
John F. Kennedy had a gift of expression that few presidents have matched. He lifted our spirits with his oratory. He challenged us to see ourselves as he saw us, Americans playing a special role in the last half of the 20th century. Here is one example. We in this country, in this generation, are, by destiny rather than choice, the watchmen on the walls of world freedom. We ask, therefore, that we may be worthy of our power and responsibility, that we may exercise our strength with wisdom and restraint, and that we may achieve in our time and for all time the ancient vision of peace on earth, goodwill toward men. That must always be our goal, and the righteousness of our cause must always underlie our strength. For as was written long ago, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. President Kennedy had prepared those remarks for a luncheon in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. They were, of course, never delivered.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.